tell us what they are. You can put something in the chat today, you can email us, or you can tweet us.
Whatever the topic that we're about, though, these conversations aren't intended to be a how-to guide. Rather, we hope that what you'll hear today and in future seminars will encourage you to reflect on your own practice and also inspire you to maybe try out new approaches or help build different collaborations. We also hope that they'll help you build a bit of a language that you can talk to clients with, funders, commissioners about the value of these approaches. But more than anything, we want to foster a bit of a community of practice. We're all here today because we're intrigued by or we're grappling with the potential and possibilities that these approaches can bring. And we can surely better realize that potential by working together and sharing what we found along the way. So today, our seminar is entitled Deliberation, Paving the Way for Democratization. And we need that, I think, more than ever before. To help us, we're going to be taking a particular look at some of the work that's going on in Southeast Europe. And across the region, there's been a rise in social movements, local civic initiatives, as a means of challenging conventional politics and also advocating for democratic governance at a time when this is under threat from autocratic regimes. And one of the ways in which they're engaging with people is via deliberative mini publics.
So to talk through these issues today, we're delighted to be joined by three brilliant speakers. Firstly, we have Gazela Pudar Drasko from the University of Belgrade. Gazela is a political sociologist and director at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory at the University of Belgrade. She also serves as a member of President Biden's Summit for Democracy. We also have Eva Bordos with a background in political science and law. She's the director of DemNet, one of the leading NGOs in Hungary specializing in democratic innovations. And last, but by no means least, we're joined by Damir Kapidžić, who's an associate professor of comparative politics at the University of Sarajevo and a visiting scholar at Harvard University on a Fulbright scholarship. His research looks at ethnic conflict, political parties, and power sharing. And he's also currently advising on a number of deliberative mini-publics across the region, including for the Council of Europe. So you can appreciate that we have three excellent and very well-informed people to talk to this subject today. So without any further hesitation on our part, it's over to Gazela for some opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Susan, very much for the invitation for this wonderful event. I think it's really great to have a chance to talk about difficulties in conducting different deliberative mini-publics. I will try to briefly summarize why actually this is important for Southeast Europe, especially when we have in mind that many societies in this region are declining in many indicators of democracy, and Serbia, where I'm coming from, is actually heading this decline in the region. So in general discussion about crisis of democracy, we face something which is even more difficult. We are facing that we had very short period when we can say that we had some democratic development. So after the socialist ex-communist period, we experienced wars in many parts of our region, especially where Damir is coming from in Bosnia Herzegovina, and we faced democratic decline, and very, I would say for Serbia, especially just 1 decade of attempts to build a democratic institution and democratic culture. So as you can see, this is very, very brief period, and this is something which is coloring everything what we are doing actually in terms of trying to introduce and trying to think how to innovate democracy in order not only to revive it, but also to build it from the beginning, from the ashes, basically, because in some parts of our region we didn't really have democracy ever. The societies where we live are characterized by captured institutions. We do not have functional institutions. We have citizens which are quite passive, and they are withdrawing from politics in attempts to preserve their own bubbles, since they cannot cope with these malfunctioning institutions, and they do not trust nor institutions, nor politicians. They tend to close themselves into very close circles of their friends and families. But still, I mean, situation is not so desperate, although sometimes we really feel desperate in a way. In previous, let's say, 7 to 8 years, maybe even more, if we count some parts like North Macedonia, for example, we have seen the rise of mostly local civic initiatives and local movements that are trying to build national movements. And they are very much oriented toward democratic inner structure building, which I think it's very important for what we are trying to say here. And they're trying to build a different type of political actors compared to traditional political parties, which are mostly centralized and in our region mostly very directed top-bottom. In these circumstances, we also, I think it's important to say that we also have some heritage in former Yugoslavia, especially. So this is not, for example, in Albania, which also belongs to the region, but in former Yugoslavia, we had some kind of experimentation with democratic institutions, even that was autocratic regime. There were local communities or local community offices which actually functioned in a way that they tried to include all the citizens of the specific territorial community where they live. And also we have the working community which at least on the paper gave equal rights to all who participated, all the workers, no matter their position. Of course, that on the paper is something which didn't really live through, and this is something where we have some heritage and we have some idea how it is possible to include everybody, but it was never functional. And that is something where we can learn from the past, but also we can somehow build on what already existed there. When we are turning to deliberation and especially citizen assemblies, which are gaining on popularity in the region, this is because we actually don't know, we see this as something which can be useful. We don't know what to do. And this emerged in recent, let's say, in last 15 years is something which can provide something to us who are trying to advocate for this, to those who are fighting for democracy, and also to the citizens. So this is something which we see as a way, as a tool, as a method that we can innovate democracy using something which can empower us all. And we work on this in very difficult conditions where we do not really have participation of decision makers. And I think Damir and Eva can say much more about this because they are experiencing this also in their daily organizational issues when they are organizing citizen assemblies. This is something which help us to build I would say coalitions, which help us to build in a way something that is possible to engage citizens. We do this on our own. So I would say in Southeast Europe, this is mostly done by the civil society organization in assistance. And in our case, I think Damir and me both coming from academia. So with some stimulus coming from academia, because this is something which obviously comes from democratic theory, we are actually trying to build something new, which will be possible, which will engage citizens in a way and provide them space that they actually feel empowered to make decisions, empowered to feel themselves politically efficient, which is something which they do not have for the moment. So this is, I think, the key reason why the deliberative wave is also taking its turn in Southeast Europe, because we do not have other channels of engagement. We have social movements who are trying to use different deliberative tools in order to engage citizens. And on the other side, we have civil society, which is actually using these tools as a way to show to the citizens that there is still possibility that they can meaningfully engage and be competent in making political decisions. So I can add a little bit more, but maybe this is where I can stop for the moment and give a word to other panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, Gazela. Really interesting in setting out some kind of key context for why we're having this conversation and why your and others on the call work is so important in that space. Eva, over to you for your thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us and organizing this indeed very vital and important conversation. So just fully agree with Gazela, and just a couple of words on how we started focusing on the concept of deliberative democracy here in Hungary. And actually that was back in 2017 and as part of an EU-funded project led by the University of Liverpool. And even at that time, we believed that, yeah, this concept could be something, a fantastic way to shake people out of their political apathy and polarization. And after the local elections in 2019, when Budapest got a new leadership and a new mayor, we, in collaboration with several other civil society organizations and activists, approached the new city administration with this proposal of jointly organize a citizen assembly. And back then, we had our doubts whether or not it would work. Because of the polarization, the apathy, and also because in this region there is historically no tradition of citizens organizing themselves or openly expressing their opinions, and many still consider public affairs to be something better to stay out of. So we had our doubts, but it seems that the method is working for us in Hungary as well. And that first assembly in Budapest was later followed by two more city-level citizen assemblies and several other smaller-scale deliberative processes. And currently we're preparing two other citizen assemblies. So indeed, there is a kind of a deliberative wave, hopefully, here in Hungary as well. And these are especially important in these times when actually the Hungarian government also innovates on citizen participation. Like, for example, this April, the government amended the law on public consultation, and now it's possible in Hungary for municipalities to hold public hearings without the physical presence of the public, of people. So that's the direction that they are taking, and I think that the concept of citizen assemblies and deliberative democracy is another way, and by using them and making it embedded more into the everyday life and political decision making can show people that another democracy is indeed possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva. And finally to Damir.
Yes, hello. So after these two great interventions, I'm going to tell you a story. And this is the story of the city of Mostar, where the first Citizens' Assembly in Southeast Europe was held in 2021. The city of Mostar did not have elections since 2008 until 2012. So it went without local elections for 12 years. The city council, the mayor, were in a technical mandate for that entire time almost. The point where you see that democratic politics and electoral politics don't work because of various political infighting, the inability of political leaders to agree, this is where a different tool was tried, and this was a citizens' assembly. So together with recommendations by the Venice Commission, the Council of Europe made a plan to try to bring in citizens to make decisions on issues where politicians were not able to do so for a very long time. Starting in mid-2020, the Citizens' Assembly got sort of rolling in a way and was held in July 2021. It was the first time that this tool, the specific deliberative tool was tried in Southeast Europe. It was a long process of setting it up, I must say. But the way that you could sort of bring together people to tackle a difficult policy issue was something that has not been tried so far. Now, just be honest, in the meantime, the city of Mostar did have elections in late 2020, which meant that the citizens, when deliberating, could actually address their recommendations to newly elected officials and then communicate this with them in terms of their implementation. I'll talk a little bit more about the Citizens' Assembly in the Q&A and follow up on those questions. But what was fascinating in this regard is that after those 4 weekends deliberation, the recommendations that the citizens came up with, and these were 32 in the field of city cleanliness and public spaces, maintenance of public spaces, the city council, this newly elected city council, adopted essentially all of them. They supported what the citizens came up with and tried to engage in dialogue with them, not what we might sort of usually see in trying to either push them away or ignore them or even attack them. So we ended up with recommendations from citizens that got transferred into policymaking. And around half of those are either implemented or in the process. The others are somewhere in the beginning phases of implementation. But all of them are somehow on the policy agenda of the people at this local community in Mostar. Now, since then, there have been more assemblies in Bosnia on the national level that turned out a bit differently. And there are 3 more underway right now, which should happen early to mid next year. So it's not a one-off. It's something that is a process that is being integrated more and more into how policy is made in countries of this region. And it's not just Bosnia, by the way. They're happening in Croatia, in Serbia, and Montenegro. There's one supposed to happen in Kosovo soon, in Macedonia. So it's something that, and Hungary has a lot of them, mostly done by Eva. And this is something that is happening across that region. So this form of engaging with citizens, as new as it may seem, as novel as it may seem, it's becoming more of a regular thing.
Thank you so much for that. It was so interesting to hear, and there were sort of echoes from what you were all saying that we find in our work. Gazela, when you were talking about low trust, I was really reminded of some of the recent survey findings we've got from the World Values Survey about sort of low trust in institutions, but also what you were saying, Damir, about the recommendations taken up into policy and just thinking through some of the experiences that we've had in the UK. So we'd love to pick up on that in the questions, and to everyone on the call, please do post your questions in the chat. But I just want to kick off with one myself before handing over to Kerry, if that's all right. We've spoken specifically about Southeast Europe today, and you touched on this, Damir, when you were kind of closing your remarks there. Is there anything about the region that lends itself to these kind of deliberative processes working really well as a means of strengthening democracy? And you're all welcome to chip in on the responses to it as well. But I wondered, Damir, if you wanted to maybe kick off.
Okay. Specifically about Southeast Europe, the point there is that citizens traditionally are not very much involved in policymaking. If you would ask politicians also how do they relate to citizens, it's mostly through electoral means, through the electoral process. And in this sense, most of these incentives for engaging citizens through citizens' assemblies have not come from politicians themselves. They haven't come from civil society either. They've come sort of from the sidelines, either from academia, from international organizations, very often, because they see the need to engage citizens in policymaking. It's just that they don't find partners, be this in civil society or among politics, who are willing to take that on. So again, there are, it's not always that case, but it's very often that you don't see these coming from the top or the bottom, but somehow from the sidelines. And that makes it a bit specific in Southeast Europe.
Really interesting. And Eva and Gazela, I wonder if there's anything you wanted to contribute from your reflections about this delib wave that you mentioned taking place in the region, and maybe what it is about the makeup of the area specifically, or the history that contributes itself to these approaches working really well. Go for it, Gazela, if you want.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's too early to say that it's going very well, because we are quite new. I mean, it's a couple of years, not more, that this started actually. And I would say, since I'm now quite deep into this, that it's really started in the last 12 months. So it's kicking off more and more, and there is a demand also through donors community, that this is something which is, useful, popular, and this is also the risk which we have. Because there is one question also here among these questions, what is the state of the civil society? The biggest problem with our civil society in the region was for many years that it was donor driven, it was professionalized, and this is something which we have to be very careful also with deliberative mini publics or different deliberative tools, not to turn it to something which is professionalized in a way that we can get money to do this and to deliver some policy proposals, but that's it. So we need to go beyond this in a way, and I think we need strong cooperation among those who are working in this, and I think this is something which is actually quite in its inception phase, but I would evaluate it for the moment quite positively, that there are connections and there are attempts to collaborate between those who actually use these tools. And if we manage somehow to navigate between something which is, donor-driven and what is genuine democratic demand of our region, I think we can turn out quite well with this, because this is something which when political change comes, and it's coming in many countries of the region, and hopefully it will come soon in the rest of those, including Hungary and Serbia specifically, this is something which is very potent. It has a lot of potential to showcase that there is something which is working, which can engage citizens, which can empower citizens, and build some different participatory culture within institutions, not only within civil society or civic or social movements, but also around institution, whether it's institutionalized like it's done in many countries in the Western Europe, for example, but also in a way that for the beginning it doesn't have to be institutionalized, but it can be massively used in order to show what potential it has and how it can actually empower citizens and bring about different ways of decision making into institutions. I'm strongly believer into this, and that this is actually why I'm working in this field, because I don't see any other possibility for this moment, if we are not thinking about big revolutions, that is not something which is going to happen very soon. I think this is the best possible solution which we have so far to try to do something and prepare ourselves also for authoritarian decline and rise of different participatory democracy.
Thank you so much, and thank you for picking up on the question in the chat as well about civil society. And Eva, I don't know if you want to come in as well and share your reflections.
Yeah, maybe. I would just go back to this issue of trust and also the trust between citizens as well, because it's mentioned that in this region there is historically no tradition of citizens talking to each other or openly, expressing their views. And partly because of the during the communist era, as we used to say, even the walls had ears, and you didn't know who was who, and you never knew who would tell what you had just said to them. And if you said something that, let's say, displeased the authorities, that could be serious consequences. So people just learn to stay silent and not to converse with each other. And the impact of deliberative processes on society can be massive in this context and huge, because these can help us relearn how to listen to each other and how to find this common denominator as well. And also this region is full of shared traumas, which would be worthwhile to process together. And these processes can be a significant help in that as well.
Okay, thank you. And now a question from me, if I can, and also as I'm planning to ask mine, there's also been a portion of the question from Alejandra in the chat, which I think relates. So I wonder if you could all just say a little bit more about what challenges you've had engaging with the authorities in your work, given the context you've just described, the sort of status and drivers in civil society, as well as the need to link into decision makers and kind of election processes in the way that perhaps you've mentioned, Damir. So what challenges have you had engaging the authorities with your work, and how did you overcome these? And if I can link into something that Alejandra is also asking, how do we make sure that these types of processes are brought in and legitimized by political elites so that they are taken into consideration in some of the ways you're working towards, rather than perhaps ignored or indeed challenged? I don't know who'd like to have a first.
So maybe I can start off again. And this is a difficult question because, as I said, a lot of these processes are not commissioned by the politicians, by official bodies themselves. So you don't really have the ability to say that you're acting because they want you to. You're acting because politics are obviously not working. The political buy-in, it requires a lot of work with politicians and with other stakeholders, by the way. And this is in convincing them that citizens' assemblies and what comes out of them can be a useful tool for them as well. So the successful example of Mostar involved hours and hours of talks with the newly elected members of the city council, trying to convince them how they can actually work together with the citizens to create policies that are beneficial. I have other examples as well where the citizens were essentially ignored by politics, meaning that they presented their work to elected leaders, they had a very brief conversation with them, and after that was just goodbye, thank you very much. So you don't really see clear examples on how to do this. Ideally, you would want to involve political leaders throughout the process. That's one of the lessons that we have learned so far, starting from the very beginning when you define the question, the remit around which citizens will be deliberating, and throughout the entire organization process. So currently we're organizing 2 assemblies in Banja Luka and Mostar, for example, and there we have engaged with the city administrations from the very beginning. They're explicitly involved in co-organizing the process itself. And in this case, anything that won't work, that doesn't work, is also part of their failure in a sense. So it's not just coming from the side now. We're trying to make it a process that does heavily involve city administration and city officials. In that way, you also get at least part of the buy-in. We'll see how much goes to implementation. That's a totally different topic on how much of what citizens come up with is actually followed through.
That's great, thank you. And I wonder if anyone else, Eva or Gazela, wants to come in on that question before we take another one from the audience.
Yeah, Eva, now you're first. Go ahead.
All right. So yeah, I fully agree with Damir, and this is also our experience that it's not easy to convince stakeholders that this is a good thing to actually implement and try out. So it takes time, but once they are on board, they're really on board. But it's not easy to break the attitude. Let's say, for example, in public administration, this oh no can do. This is a new thing. It would require changing the law. It would require changing certain practices, and it's not easy to convince city administrators that this is the way forward, because they're super concerned that if something goes wrong, then they would bear the consequences, and this is something that really need time to break down. And also what is another aspect is not always every politician is or can be convinced. Like, for example, in Hungary, some politicians attacked, for example, us and try to delegitimize the process that we were organizing, saying that it's highly undemocratic, and we were accused of, mishandling citizens' data, and we were labeled as the agents of George Soros, trying to undermine I don't know what. So these are the issues that we face, unfortunately, here, and it does not make our situation any easier. But we hope to, we hope to find answers to that as well at some point.
Thank you. And Gazela, any kind of final reflections on that point?
Yes, but I fully subscribe to everything what Eva and Damir said. The only thing which I think we sometimes also need to think of is whether should we actually engage politicians always. So sometimes I think the price is too high. And this is something which we have to have in mind in authoritarian regimes. We do not want to turn, for example, citizen assemblies or any other tool into tool which actually will help them to maintain autocratic regimes. So this is something which me personally, I'm always asking myself, okay, when do we really want to do this? And usually that is something which I would say on the local level, that's the level where it's better, it's good to try. Often we fail, but still I think this is important. But on the national level, sometimes I think maybe it's even better that we do not have them. We had experiences where they would appear and then they would just give their populist speech, which didn't address any of the concerns which were raised during the citizen assembly, and that made things even worse for citizens because they felt somehow, okay, all over again, so it's nothing that they can do. So sometimes I think maybe we should also think when we do that and when we do not do that. So there is no recipe, obviously. I cannot tell you, sorry, I have a kid here interrupting, but we cannot tell you always do on the local level, never do on national level, or vice versa. But sometimes I think we need really to think if we have this ambition to help building democratic institution, that is something where we also have to evaluate a bit when yes, when no.
Yeah, really, really important. And what we don't do is as important as what we do. So yeah, thank you for that. I just want to move on to the next question. There's quite a few reflections in the chat which deal with a kind of what Marko Prelec, sorry if I've mispronounced that, refers to as the nuts and bolts of the process of who's in the room. And kind of linking in with that, Hannah Kapitanovic has asked about the particular challenges for societies divided on ethno-national or ethno-religious lines. And also there's one from Lucy Parry who says, how important is it that you're following the same strict criteria with a sortition approach in these kind of instances? So I was wondering, Damir, maybe you could reflect first on your experiences in Mostar and the Citizens' Assembly there, and then we can sort of think more broadly about other processes that have taken place.
Yes, of course. So as a basic question about how you get into the nuts and bolts, there you have the process is structured in such a way that you have a learning process and then a deliberation process with citizens. It lasts for a long time. So a minimum is 4 days for such a process to be completely understood as a citizens' assembly. 3 days can also work, but it's for days. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not just a few hours like a town hall meeting. And within these days, citizens get enough time to learn about the topic to become more or less experts. And the question there is, politicians, they don't learn about days before making a decision in parliament. And it's the same way that you try to engage with citizens who don't know much about it to learn about this. And they come up with actionable recommendations based on this, based on what they learn. Now, about deliberation in divided societies, be they divided on ethno-national, ethno-religious lines, there were a lot of challenges here. Add to that a post-conflict society such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, and you have even more. Mostar is the epitome of a divided city, basically, where some residents don't even want to go to the other part of the city. So we had to build that into the recruitment process itself, into getting the citizens on board. So, for example, we built in another sortition criteria along which we selected the participants, which was ethnic identity. We asked them this directly, like, if you're interested, please give us this information, amongst which was ethnic identity. We had the citizens from all across the city, meaning that you had both sides represented, both urban and rural areas. And all of this sort of gave us a pool of people from which we could select a representative group. Now, in this selection process of the representative group, we basically took the ethnic makeup of the city, the latest data that we have, and selected it as a representative sample of the city. What you did essentially get was a city in a room. The more difficult one that I did was the national one, where we selected across the entire country of Bosnia and Herzegovina, across all ethnic groups, and tried to put Bosnia and Herzegovina in a room. We did succeed in that part. It was hugely representative, equally from both ethnic perspective, regional perspective, gender, age. All of that was put together in a room with 57 citizens who deliberated on the very difficult issue of electoral reform and constitutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As you might know, that didn't really work out well with politicians. That's the case that didn't provoke any reaction from politicians themselves. The citizens, when you bring them together from these different groups, they are actually very much able to work among each other. We'd had absolutely no problems in creating this environment for them that is conducive for them to make policy recommendations. Of course, you have to design the steps along the way. They have to get to know each other. They have to build trust towards each other that they don't have in the beginning. But once they see that their co-citizens, even from different ethnic groups, have the same problems, the same issues, and also want to solve them, they sort of get in a more collaborative thinking. The idea there is that you first get them to know each other rather than forcing their ethnic identities on them from the start. So we don't have no groups based on ethnic belonging and so on. It's even the icebreakers are built in such a way that you're not able to identify with groups from the very beginning. You first have to speak to the people to get to know them. And in this way, it actually worked quite well. We got very constructive work across ethnic and entity borderlines in Bosnia and Herzegovina, across these divisions.
That's great, thank you. Eva, I wonder if you could reflect maybe on some of the practices in Hungary that you've been doing about, who's in the room and what kind of, how you're making sure you're getting a great representative sample, whether you're using traditional sortition approaches for these kind of things or other ways of ensuring that.
Yeah, we were also using two-stage random selection here in Hungary. So first, a large number of citizens gets an invitation letter in their mailbox, and those who answer this letter, out of these people, we again randomly select the participants of the citizen assembly. Damir has just described the process. We mostly followed that, except that we did not have the ethnicity question. So our groups were representative based on age groups, gender, level of education, and the location of where they live within the city. And we also managed to get the city in the room, and great discussions, mostly similar experiences. Those of the mayors that people often start the process with great skepticism, and they question what the point of this whole exercise is. But by the end of the process, we always see that there are new friendships built and established, and people become a lot more engaged. And in the final survey, they all report that, yeah, this is something that they would do again, that would recommend to their friends to do if they had a chance. And we also see some kind of the level of trust towards the city administration to improve. So these are really good signs, and I hope that we will see results in the future at the societal level too.
Great. Those shifts in attitude are so important to measure. We find the same in the work that we do here. Gazela, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on processes, or if not, I'm going to hand over to Kerry for a knotty question about funding.
Well, actually, I just wanted to add on what Damir said. We actually, all three of us came back a few days, 10 days ago from Copenhagen, from the global conference Democracy R&D, which is actually gathering deliberative democrats. And I remember that there was a woman there, a person who was speaking about deliberation in conflict areas, and she said that they are just about to do citizen assembly in Palestine about issue between Israel and Palestine. And when all these terrible things happen, I was just thinking how actually would be good to have something like that, and how impossible it is to have it under current circumstances, and when you have like open conflict, open war going on. But I think that in many ways, I think that deliberation can actually help to shed a different perspective on the things, because what we frequently hear, especially in our region, which is very dominated by conflict narratives, especially again ethnic narratives, having perspective from the lay citizens, when they sit together, when they see, as Eva and Damir said, that they have very common problems, and they can actually overcome them through discussion. I think that's something which we do not use enough. We do not attempt enough to use this in order to help those who are trying to bridge the conflicts. It's just a reflection. I mean, it's not that I can say anything about this, but I was really thinking deeply when everything happened in the Near East about that event, and how actually that could be something which is very potent to change something.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think that's a really important reflection in this context, and to draw forward the work that all three of you have been working on or thinking about, and how it might operate in different contexts and in different systems, even when there are similarities in terms of those kind of large scale kind of issues. I wonder, so I mean, I was going to ask you a question about funding and that idea around some of the supports and potential of using, but funding at two levels. So I'm going to combine a question from Peter with a question from Graham. So Peter's asking, citizens' assemblies can be quite expensive. So, kind of where do you find funding for projects in order both to kick them off, but also perhaps to keep them ongoing? So that's perhaps a sort of project-specific aspect of that. But then related to that, Graham's reflecting that there seems to be enough funding from generous funders to sort of new democracies, but it's not always well coordinated. So do we need some more sort of global institutional structures, or some sort of some way of a sort of funding architecture that could actually invest in and support all of the activity that it sounds like is going on in your contexts? So yeah, at the kind of project level, but perhaps more broadly as well, do we need to be thinking differently about it?
Yeah, I think this is mostly a question for Eva and Gazela, but in generally speaking, all of the assemblies in Southeast Europe have had external funding. This is different from assemblies in richer countries, mostly Western European countries, where local governments or national governments are usually those who are funding these things, these processes. So that's a huge difference there. And finding funding for such a process is always a challenge. This is why there are still so few of them happening. They are expensive to run. They're expensive to run continuously on a policy cycle.
Yes, I can only confirm what Damir said, that our first two citizen assemblies were actually part of academic project funded by European Union Erasmus Plus program. And I could say that only in these types of project you can really go by the book, to fulfill all criteria which you need to have the proper deliberation. In all other cases where we work also together with civil society organization, there are always pressures regarding time, regarding deliverables you need to have. But I think this is something which we need definitely to work on, how to set the criteria, how to set standards, because there is increasing now number of citizen assemblies, and we wouldn't like to have that to turn into just another participatory tool, like it was, for example, public hearing or something like that. So it has to keep some standardized form, and this is something which can be challenging. But in any case, I think that in Southeast Europe, this is definitely external funding from donors, European Union, from USAID agency, from different international agencies. Council of Europe, for example, was I think financing this in Mostar and Bosnia Herzegovina. So for the moment, we do not have initiatives from the state institutions, whether on the local or the national level, to actually try to do this, because it is costly and because there is no incentive for them to do this. I mean, it's in general, we need a bit more democratized institutions to have this. But just to answer to Graham, I know what he's thinking. I mean, we're working for already over a year, I think, on different issues. And definitely, I don't think that funding is a problem. I think that there are many things which are happening in parallel. They are not coordinating among in different streams, etc. And this is something where we would need not only better coordination, but also more investment, because we see that democracy is really in very problematic stage everywhere. And we are discussing all the time, and I'm going in different events where we're discussing, I don't know, I mean, digital transformation, which is very important, but still you cannot have anything properly done if you do not have really democratic institutions. So I think we need to bring back this into the focus. And I think that this deliberative wave is something which needs to be in the focus for building again, or rebuilding or improving democracy in different sides of the world.
Thank you, Eva.
You also often hear this from politicians and decision makers, that these processes are extremely costly. And our answer is always that, yes, democracy costs money, and organizing a citizen assembly is still cheaper than facing the consequences of a bad project, for example, or a policy that is rejected by citizens. So it's actually worth investing into these deliberative processes. But I would also want to mention one initiative coming from colleagues in Northern Europe, Martin Assassi and Peter MacLeod, who actually suggest that countries create a so-called democratic action fund. And the concept is that these countries just allocate like 5% of their election and legislative operational spending to this fund, and use this fund to finance initiatives and deliberative actions, which I think is definitely an interesting idea and is worth exploring it further.
That is really interesting, and thank you for raising that work. I'm just going to ask a question as well about culture and education. I wonder, Eva, I know you've just spoken, but if I could come to you first on this, because I'm just thinking back, and one of the participants has raised this comment that you made, you know, the legacy of those kind of cultural experiences like the walls have ears. And I wonder if you could share what role you think that maybe education can play in helping encourage participation and perhaps overcoming the legacy of that kind of that culture in this. So is there a role for civics, for instance, in boosting participation among the public? Yeah, just what role education can play here.
Yeah, I mean, fighting this is not easy, and it's definitely it takes time, and we need to be patient, and it requires effort to explain citizens, everybody, why it is good to engage in discussions about public affairs, and yeah, it's also because it's a complex issue, right? So representative deliberative processes are complex, and it's very, very difficult to explain it to people where even simpler methods are not being used. So yeah, it's a challenge. And also when it comes to school education, for example, because this is something that you should learn in school, right? So how you cooperate with others, and how you engage in public affairs. So the school system in Hungary does not support that work either, because in Hungary there is still frontal teaching, and students receive very few tasks that encourage independent thinking. So very few tasks that need to be solved in groups, where they could learn how to collectively kind of like find solutions to various issues. So there's a lot to do here in this region. I don't know if Gazela and Damir can add any more to this.
Yeah. Gazela, I wonder if there's anything you want to contribute on that.
No, I think Eva covered it pretty much very well.
And
one more thing, maybe the media, the role of media could also be emphasized here, because we find it very difficult in Hungary to engage mainstream media to report, about these processes and come and see what's going on, and I know that is also something that we need to focus a bit more on in the future.
That's great, thank you. And Damir, I wonder if there's anything you want to add. I remember earlier you were talking about the kind of pushes from academia rather than necessarily civil society. So yeah.
I mean, there is a way to try to include this in civics and basic education in schools, for example. One way is to introduce people to a random sortition for things like president of the class. I mean, this is not done in many countries, other countries either. Where you would assign these roles in a school setting based on criteria that emphasize the sort of possibility for everyone and the responsibility of everyone to take on the tasks of being either treasurer or president of class, and rotate faster. So it's no longer a competition as it is in representative democracy and electoral competition, but it is much more something that is random and that builds a sense of you have to do this for your community, whether it's a class and then later on school, later on society. That's a possible idea.
But I just have to add something. I mean, this is obviously very necessary, and I would strongly support. But in order to do this, you need first to enter the system, and you enter, political institution in term. You need to have Ministry of Education supporting this in order to have it. And this is very difficult to have in an authoritarian regime, because by default, authoritarian regimes actually want to eliminate all the arenas of critical thinking. And this is something which actually teaches kids how to critically think. And I think this is very important. But unfortunately, I don't see that it's going to happen very soon. But for some new pro-democratic governments in our region, this would be and should be something, some take-up which should be there. And there is maybe the role of academia. We should advocate for this when times come.
So I was just going to hand over to Kerry, who I think has just lost her internet briefly. So I will finish. Are we back?
Yeah, just back. I was desperately trying to unmute, which, you know. So we've just got a few minutes left. So we're coming to the end of the conversation. One thing I just wanted to not leave, though, is there's a few points in the chat about kind of limitations and shortcomings. You know, inevitably all processes, including the ones you're involved in, will have bits that go well and bits that go less well. Given that we really don't have any time, I wonder if you could give me just one sentence from each of you about what you would say is the biggest pitfall from the work that you've been involved in. What would be the biggest limitation, the thing that didn't work as well as you thought it would? Maybe just one brief reflection from each of you, and then we will close. So, Damir, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, so just one thing. Continuously engaging with elected politicians. So in a way that they see this process as something that is an ongoing thing. Most of them see it just as a one-off or something that you can push aside.
Perfect, thank you. Eva, I'll come to you next.
Oh, difficult. Maybe visibility, communication. That is what I would say, because that also, you know, brings legitimacy. So yeah, communication and visibility.
And Gazela, for you?
Well, I support all both, but I would add also we need more people that would be able to do this in this region. So we are few actually who are skilled enough to perform this, and we have a lot of people who are coming, you know, from different international organizations, but it would be good to have really local forces, let's say like that.
That's excellent. Thank you all. And thank you to those who've joined us for the seminar and for such interesting questions. And so with that, it only remains for us to say thank you so much for joining us this lunchtime for this conversation with Gazela, with Eva and Damir. And of course, thank you so much to those three for sharing their expertise and experience so generously.
So on next steps, very, very briefly, there are two things to have a look out for. The first is going to be a write-up from this discussion, and just to echo the thanks for the speakers and the brilliant questions for making that going to be a very easy thing to write up. There's going to be a lot there to share, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. The second is that the next seminar is going to be on the role that deliberation can play in economic policy. That's going to be scheduled next month, probably around the time of the autumn statement with any luck, but the invites are going to be in your inbox soon. So until then, thank you to everyone on the panel, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this lunchtime, and we'll see you soon.